Wireless LAN Weekly, Episode 31, Using the Right Tool for the Job.
Welcome to Wireless LAN Weekly, a podcast focused on the wireless networking professional. We aim to educate, inform, entertain, and inspire. Get ready to listen and enjoy. Now to our host of the show, Keith Parsons.
Welcome back to Wireless LAN Weekly. This is Episode 31, Using the Right Tool for the Job. My name is Keith Parsons, and I'll be your host for the day, Using the Right Tool for the Job. This comes from a blog post I did for AirMagnet. AirMagnet has a community website called AirWise, and I put together a little blog post for there, and I thought it would make a fine content for a podcast. And so today, let's just get on with the show, using the right tool for the job.
Interesting facts, little-known tidbits, things you might not have known, short little bits to set your mind a-reeling.
If you ever wanted to know if your microwave oven can leak, a simple way to find out if your microwave oven is leaking 2.4 gig energy, put your cell phone inside the microwave oven, inside of its little shielded container. And if your phone can ring when it's on the inside, RF energy is getting through that box and ringing your phone on the inside. Better yet, if you have a 2.4 gig smartphone that has Wi-Fi going on, try a test using Wi-Fi to talk inside there. And if your phone can work from inside your microwave, that means the microwave energy can leak out. It's a poor man's test, but it works pretty good.
Things every wireless LAN professional needs to know. Gear up, buckle down, and stand by for the real techie stuff.
I kind of got this idea for this topic of using the right tool from the job and the associated graphic from a series of gigs I did with a variety of clients. And the clients continued to go and add more and more access points in their network. Whenever they had any kind of problem at all, they would solve it by adding another access point. And then when we came back and analyzed how they got to a position where they had way too many access points, we found that the only tool they had in their arsenal whenever there was a problem, they didn't control the clients, they didn't control the infrastructure. The only thing they could control was the access points. And it reminded me of a term, and it's called by many names, but the first guy supposedly who coined it was Maslow, the guy who's famous for Maslow's hierarchy, and he called it Maslow's hammer. And you've probably heard one or more of the following. When the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem begins to resemble a nail. Or, he that is good with a hammer tends to think that everything is a nail. Or, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you are likely to perceive every problem as a nail. If all you have are access points, and the only thing you can control is the number of access points, perhaps the power settings on the access points, you might not even have the ability to control the antennas that are on the access points. There might be a fixed antenna solution. Well, if that's all you have, then amazing. Any wireless problem you have looks like you can solve it with another access point. And just as it's silly enough to think of all problems are nails, and if you have a hammer, you can fix everything with a hammer, well, you can't fix everything with a hammer. You can't fix everything with a nail. Now, I've personally been involved in this situation. I was, and I have been teaching AirMagnet classes for nearly a decade now, since the products first launched in 2001, and have taught, thousands of people how to use AirMagnet products. And it's been part of my life, and I think I'm pretty good at it. And a large chunk of just about every day of my life is spent in working in wireless LAN, specifically using different AirMagnet tools to accomplish and solve problems. And then one day, a couple of weeks ago, I was at a consulting gig, and I was working on something, and one of the clients was looking over my shoulder, and they'd been using AirMagnet for a while as well. And as I did something, they turned around and asked, why did you do it that way? And I thought I was doing it the easy way, the way that I've always done it. And they came along and with just a couple of mouse moves and a couple of clicks showed that the technique that I'd been using for a very long time was kind of outdated, that they had found a new way to do it. So, why was I continuing to do it an old, slow way? Well, the reason was that's just the way I'd always done it. And as long as we continue to do the things that we've always done, we will just continue to do the things that we've done. We need to break out of that now and then. So let's return back to that hammer and all those nails that we've been talking about. In our wireless LAN industry, we spend our days designing, maintaining, troubleshooting a wide set of wireless LAN equipment, from APs to clients, and we've learned it from the mentors above us. Perhaps we attended a CWNA class or a CCNA wireless class, and we've learned to work on the equipment we have. But why did we do it the same way? Why don't we think about some of the other things that are there? I have another example. I used to not only do in my consulting practice, but also teach you really didn't need to have a spectrum analyzer, because as wireless LAN professionals, we get paid for delivering bits. We don't necessarily get paid for delivering dBs or SSI. We've been in situations many times where the failure of the wireless LAN was because the previous people who designed it merely to be coverage. Only coverage was all they were after. They wanted to deliver neg 72 dB everywhere, and they did. And they delivered radio waves. And then the network failed. Well, that's because we need to get paid for delivering bits, bytes, data in the proper way at the proper time. And RSSI, though valuable, though actually extremely critical, isn't sufficient enough. And so I used to say, if you can get the bits to work, then you don't really need the spectrum analyzer. Now, this was back when renting a spectrum analyzer was going to cost me $1,000 to $2,000 a day, because they're $20,000 to $30,000 devices. In fact, I even had a quote. And this was a quote I'd given back in 2005, and it was, "If the frames are being delivered properly, who cares about the RF?" That was the old Keith. That's hopefully I've changed to move forward. Along comes a product from Cognio that AirMagnet resold called Spectrum Expert, and using this new tool, which instead of costing $20,000 or $30,000 is down in the $4,000 range, much more acceptable, you could all of a sudden see raw ambient RF. And I learned that those Wi-Fi NICs that I was looking at, that noise variable, had signal noise ratio, and the noise variable in the wireless NIC, I had assumed I just had a very low resolution spectrum analyzer. I had a Wi-Fi NIC that would give me a noise variable on channels 1 through 14. So I thought it has low resolution, but it was showing me raw noise. It wasn't. Wi-Fi NICs cannot show raw ambient RF. That's why Cisco's moved on today into their clean air technology, and Aruba's been putting spectrum analyzers in. We need the spectrum analyzer view. It's the only way we can see that. So over the last couple of years, maybe 5 years or so, I've learned that what I thought in the past and the tools I thought I needed were wrong. You can't get away with just a Wi-Fi analyzer anymore. You need a spectrum analyzer to support that. We need, in our industry, to use the appropriate tool for the job. Years ago, when I was just newly married, I bought a new Plymouth Horizon, a little car, looked like a Volkswagen Rabbit. And my father, who was, you have to change your own oil. And I said, I don't think I'm going to change my oil. It's only been a month. And he goes, oh, you have to change all the time. That, oil is cheaper than metal, and so change your oil. And I just didn't do it. And when I woke up one Saturday morning, he was out in the garage. He came to visit, and he was changing the oil in my car. Well, he had the same type of car, but a couple years earlier, and there was a difference in the way the engines were built, and he had went in trying to change the oil filter so he could change the oil, and his wrench that worked on his didn't work on my engine. So he got a little screwdriver and went tap, 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 trying to push the filter away, and ended up pushing the screwdriver clean through the filter. It's now leaking oil, and all I see is that he's taking my car and driving down the street fairly quickly. And I guess I heard later that he coasted down the hill until he found one of those little lube shops who had the appropriate tools to change the oil filter. And my father, who had taught me many things growing up, one of which had to take care of cars, all of a sudden had a change of heart after the first time he used a lube site to change the oil in the car, and realized, wait, They have the appropriate tool at the right time to do the right job, and they can do it quicker, better, and faster than I can with the tools I have at home. And so he learned to change his mistakes, and we need to also come around and look in our own wireless LAN toolkit to find out what tools are we using, and perhaps they were the wrong tool. We might just have a big hammer, and we're hammering away at everything that shows up. I know people who are very good at Wireshark or OmniPeak or AirMagnet, and they look at that tool and think, well, I can solve all wireless LAN issues with this single tool. So let's go through a couple questions, and just to make you think a little bit about what tools you're using today, and maybe you can think about what you might want to change and think about some of the other things that are available. So what tools do you use to design, maintain, and troubleshoot your network? First question. Are you still using the old AP on a stick method of designing, and is your design goal merely coverage? Remember, coverage is easy. You can get coverage very easily in any area by adding more APs or turning up the power or even putting amplifier on. Coverage is easy, but what's hard to do is get the wireless network that meets all the design goals, not merely coverage. I'll let you think about that first question for a second. Second question. Are you still trying to estimate cell overlap with the old-fashioned percentage methods? If you look in Cisco's design doc, under a little asterisk, they have a link that takes you to a web page that you can see what the real formula is for coverage overlap. I've written a white paper. You can go on the website and download it on the fallacy of coverage overlap. And the whole percentage thing just doesn't work. The math isn't there. I doubt anyone in the history of Wi-Fi has ever used the correct math to calculate a percent overlap between two cells. And yet what we really want the overlap for is to ensure that clients have redundancy, that if one AP goes down, there's a backup that they can pick up on the other. So instead of thinking of overlap in the old-fashioned percent way, perhaps we should be looking at overlap from the client's perspective. And the client just needs to see one or two or more APs at a certain signal strength. So it's just a paradigm shift to think about coverage overlap a different way. Third question. Are you still using NetStumbler or that type of file like Insider was a great tool as well, or Xeris puts out a Wi-Fi Finder tool? Are you using these cheap tools, though inexpensive and fairly decent, to help you find rogue access points? They can work. They do have the capacity to do that. And yet there are tools today from a variety of vendors that you can get that have built-in ACLs or access control lists, the good guys on your network compared to the rogues. And what do you do about neighbors? And is there new ways to think about rogues that aren't just internal but external, and how can you go about that? So I don't want to turn this into a rogue discussion, but just think about the tools you're currently using. Just because they're free and easy doesn't mean it's the best tool to use for the job. Next question. See if you can think about this one for a minute. Are you still using a Wi-Fi NIC to measure ambient RF? I've been doing a demonstration in a variety of classes and to different consulting clients to show that Wi-Fi NICs, when they display noise, can be off by over 100% difference, as in the NIC is reporting noise when there isn't any with a spectrum analyzer, or when there's an enormous amount of noise that you can see with a spectrum analyzer, the Wi-Fi NIC shows nothing. An example of this, when you have a jammer on that's very loud, very obvious in a spectrum analyzer to see the jammer, and yet because the jammer is so loud, it messes with the CCA mechanism built into a Wi-Fi NIC, so the NICs don't transmit packets, they don't transmit bits in the air, no bits in the air, no way to calculate RF noise with a Wi-Fi NIC, and so that shows up as no noise, where actually there's an enormous amount of noise. And this little change is just a paradigm shift, using the correct tool, a spectrum analyzer rather than a Wi-Fi NIC to see ambient RF. Next question. Are you still trying to understand Wi-Fi by looking inside the IP layer payload? Now, those of us who come with any kind of sniffing background, we're so used to looking in the application layer, trying to find out traffic patterns, where things are going, etc. It's very useful for network analysis. But the payload itself is totally useless when it comes to looking at Wi-Fi analysis. All Wi-Fi information happens at the MAC layer as a 802.11 frame. As soon as it hits the AP, or in a lightweight AP to the controller, it gets converted back into an Ethernet frame with an appropriate payload. But in the air, whether the payload is a letter to Aunt Sue or a spreadsheet or a voice frame matters not to my ability to decipher, is my wireless network working properly? So using an upper layer protocol analyzer won't help with the lower layer. An example I give in class is ping. Ping is a fantastic tool. We love ping, but ping can totally be masked by a problem at the MAC layer. Ping will say it's successful if it just gets one frame through, and yet you miss all of the retries at the MAC layer. You might be running 80-90% retries, and ping will still say that the connection's good. So you have to use the appropriate tool at the appropriate place. And the last question here is, are you still using an old laptop with a PCMCIA slot just because your old tools require it? We need to be thinking more about moving to newer platforms, perhaps PCI Express, though I'm not really enamored with PCI Express, or USB. And if we move toward a USB platform, we can use Macintoshes, netbooks, or any Windows PC that has USB ports to be our tool of choice. It allows us more flexibility than coming up with an old-fashioned tool. Now, this comes to mind because I had a class a couple weeks ago, and the students all had brought brand new laptops, and none of the laptops could run the PCMCIA cards that I had brought with me for the students to do their exercises with. And it's getting harder and harder to find a good industrial strength laptop that has a PCMCIA card from major vendors. They're moving away from that. And so if our tools are still tied back to the PCMCIA card, where is that going to leave us? So this section today was basically just to get you to start thinking about tools. And the final question, what is your wireless LAN hammer? I'm sure you have a tool that's your favorite tool of choice. It feels like a hammer to you, and everything in the world looks like a nail. Let's have a little paradigm shift in our industry, and as wireless LAN professionals, let's go out and find the correct tools to use for the correct time. There are times when a Wi-Fi NIC is all you need. There are other times when you need a spectrum analyzer. There are times when you need to decode and look what's going on at the application layer. There's other times when all we need is to be able to look at the MAC layer and decode there. Just like my father learned that my Plymouth Horizon needed a special tool to get off the oil filter, we need to learn that we need our special tools to allow us to do our job in maintaining, designing, and troubleshooting our wireless LAN. Thanks for listening, and if you have any ideas of your own, feel free to leave comments on the webpage or send to feedback@wirelesslanprofessionals.com, and we'll get your input into an upcoming episode. We'd also be interested in hearing back from you if there are topics that are of interest to you that we can add to the podcast. We'd be glad to incorporate those and bring them in. So this is the final episode of the summertime, and then starting in the fall, we'll bring back some new and engaging guests to either host or to have interviews with. So we're looking forward to even more episodes after this episode 31. So thanks for listening to episode 31 of Wireless LAN Weekly on using the right tool for the right job. And we'll be back next week. Thank you.
Wireless LAN Weekly, a podcast focused on the needs of wireless LAN professionals. We look forward to your feedback. Please leave your comments at the bottom of the show notes, or email feedback on the show can be sent to feedback@wirelesslanprofessionals.com. If you'd like to leave a voicemail feedback, just call 24/7 and leave a message at 1-801-481-9018. Until next time, this has been another production of wirelesslanprofessionals.com, a place to educate, inform, entertain, and inspire.